we will be doing today MOOC on Introduction to Sociology 2, and we shall be doing Unit 6, which is Interactionism, Concept and the very definition of Interactionism. Let us come to the concept of interactionism and how it was proposed for the very first time by none other than Herbert Blumer. Now, who was Herbert Blumer? Herbert Blumer, as we all know, was a great philosopher as well as a very great sociologist. He, for the very first time, in an article, Man and Society, had published the work of his own college notes and the lectures that he had produced before his students, and which was published for the very first time in 1937 by Prentice Hall. And it is there where he spoke for the very first time of symbolic interactionism as a concept. And we should know that the term had been used as a way of conducting our everyday life, the group life and the collective life. Therefore, symbolic interactionism as a concept was proposed and propounded for the very first time by Herbert Blumer, who took into cognizance the various ways of conducting the group life and the collective life of the people. Now, we shall be moving into the intellectual foundations of symbolic interactionism, since we know that symbolic interactionism per se has a very rich and a very flavored pedigree of its own. Starting from the stalwarts like John Dewey, Herbert Mead, W.I. Thomas, William James, Robert Park, and many others like Peter Berger, Luckman, Louis Firth, Robert Redfield, etc. The sociological pedigree and the rich tradition of symbolic interactionism has a long way to go. There have been various differences in the way people think, the way people believe about the various stands of interactionism. But despite doing that, we should understand that there are certain similarities in their premises, in their theoretical clarity, the way they dealt with the different ideas of human thought. It is probably this likeness, this clarity, this bonding that will make us or bring us to one umbrella of interactionism. Now, let us look into the premises of symbolic interactionism one by one. The first premise proposes that human beings usually act towards things in terms of the meaning that it has for them. Human beings always look for a particular meaning which is embedded into the thing or the object that they are motivated towards or they are oriented towards. It is important for interactionists to understand the very meaning that the object is loaded with and the meaning that individuals will concentrate upon. The meaning that these things have for human beings are absolutely important in their own rights. And if we ignore the meaning that is there and towards which people act, then it will be difficult for us to understand the very interactionist stand, the point of view towards which or with which people act towards a particular thing. Therefore, the meaning of the thing, as you will understand, is very, very important to us. We must understand one thing very, very clearly. Now, what is it? That meanings and causes are not the similar thing. You must get this idea very well into your head, that it is important to understand the factors that produce particular kinds of behavior. And rather, it is more important to understand the meaning for which or that which is embedded into that particular item or the product to which people act. We become busy with the initiating factors and the resultant behavior, and in the process become blind to the very meaning that individual attaches to it. So for Herbert Blumer, for anybody dealing with some symbolic interactionism, what was important was not the causative factors, the causal factors, the instigating factors which produced a particular behavior. what was the different factors which led to the outcome, that particular behavioral outcome. But instead, what was more important is what is the meaning that you attach to that particular object or to a particular thing. For instance, I'm using a mobile phone. What is the meaning I attach to my behavior? It is not important how I get this mobile phone, who has gifted me this, or in what context I'm using it. It is important that what is the meaning, what is the attachment, how you interpret the meaning of that item and how you are acting towards it. The subjective idea, the subjective understanding will vary from one individual to another. Every individual will learn to attach a meaning towards the item that he is focused on. And as a student of symbolic interactionism, I must repeat, as a student of symbolic interactionism, when you are learning about this perspective, see, in sociology we have different kind of perspectives. We have functionalist perspective, we have conflict perspective, we have exchange perspective, we have critical perspective. But when you, as a learner of sociology, and especially into this particular MOOC, you're talking about interactionism, meaning of the thing is very important. Please keep that in mind. Now, what is embedded meaning? Symbolic interactionism believes that these meanings are more important because they are independent and they exist in their own rights. The role of the meaning in the formation of the behavior is very vital to us. Now, what sets symbolic interactionism apart from other perspective is the very source of the meaning. Where do I get the meaning from? Where does the meaning come from? Where does it emerge from? Where does it emanate from? Now, let us try and understand very clearly that the thing can come into an object from two possible ways. One is this, that the meaning may be intrinsic, which means that the meaning is attached to the object itself and it may constitute the very natural entity or the identity of the object itself. For instance, if I say this table that I'm talking, this mic, the room that I'm sitting, the pen that I'm using, the laptop which I'm using, all of them has an intrinsic idea or intrinsic or inherent meaning within it. This is what is the inherent idea. Inherent ideas or inherent meanings are sometimes attached to the theory of realism. Now, what is it? Such meanings that these objects carry come from these objects only as such. There is no other process involved in its very formation, because the meaning is hidden, it is latent, and it is embedded within the object itself. Now, all it becomes necessary is to cognize the very meaning that comes within the thing itself. Now, can you tell me, after having heard this sentence, learning this sentence, what do we think of? Yes, exactly. We can think of the realist position of philosophy. And such a position is very much strongly embedded in social and psychological sciences. Okay, this is one of the classic positions of realism. And what does realism say? Realism say that it is our mind which has the imprint of everything that we see outside. So the external world that we see outside is nothing but the mere representation, an imperfect representation of what is in my head, what is in my brain, and what is in my mind. So what you see outside is unreal, because the only real thing is what my mind see, what my mind want to see. It is there in my mind. So what you see outside, everything that you see outside, the cat, the dog, the people walking on the street. For instance, today is a rainy day. All the rain and every cloudy sky that we see outside is the mere representation of what is there already in my mind. So it is a shadow of the objects that my mind has already seen. So this is what is my realist position. Such meanings that these objects carry come from these objects only, as I've already said. And this is necessary that we cognize the very meaning is there within the thing itself. It doesn't come from outside, because it comes from the mind which looks into the things. And what we see outside is just the imprint, a shadow, a photocopy, an imprint of what is there in our mind. This must be very much understood, because I think when you're flipping through the pages of sociology, sometimes when you go through such perspectives, you will learn to connect it with our original, the philosophy, which is actually the father of all sciences. And unless you know what is realism, you won't be able to understand its difference from interactionism. The origin of the meaning of an object is twofold, as I've said, and sometimes the meaning is intrinsic to the object itself. For instance, a table, a spoon, a pencil, a hat, etc. The proponents of realism always presume that reality exists independent of the mind. This is against the non-realist view. Now, what is the non-realist view? That is a constructivist view itself, and from where we get interactionism. They challenge the certainty of anything beyond one's mind. This means realists do not rely on the capacity of an object to have its own inherent character, for it assumes that the objects are void substances. They become meaningful when? When do you think they become meaningful? Yes, exactly. They become meaningful only when our mind presumes them, our mind observes them, our mind gives it a meaning. Otherwise, object doesn't have any meaning. That is what realists think. However, as social sciences developed and they became more matured, and in a long time we have tried coming outside the purview of realism, and we tried developing our ideas of constructivism, which said that there are different, volatile and more complex social phenomena which have their own autonomous existence and which cannot be understood by the mind itself. Because it is here that social actors, the meaning that they attach to the objects, become more important. Unlike natural sciences that deal with mute objects which doesn't have a heart, a mind of its own, now that we were moving towards social sciences, it was necessary to study them. And therefore, this ontological position is what we call objectivism. And objectivism came to be contrasted with constructivism. You must take it, understand it very nicely, that objectivism is related to positivism, where we are trying to, relate or trying to study the outer phenomena, the natural world, the way natural sciences do, by cause and effect, laws and rules. But now, as we move towards constructivism, we try and give more importance not to the object itself, but even what meaning the man attaches towards those things. Because, in the natural sciences, we study only objects which are inanimate. For instance, chemicals and different kind of compositions, molecular parts, nucleus, all those things. But when we are moving towards social sciences, we deal with human actors. And their motivations, their actions cannot be understood if you do not learn to understand the meaning that they attach to that particular action or to that particular item. Here, social action becomes more important. Therefore, constructivism presumes that the nature of social phenomena depends on what? The social actors and the meanings that they propose. This presumes that reality is very much dependent on the meanings that individuals attach. And they are not external because they depend upon the intrinsic faculties of the man. Instead, we must understand this very clearly, that reality is basically a kind of mental construction that is not independent of the observer and his context. So in order to understand the behavior that individual displays in the society, we have to take into consideration his point of view, his mental presentations, his mental state of mind, and very important, the historical epoch or the social context in which he is saying something or acting as he does. So the social actor and his context becomes an important idea of consideration. And this is very much against the realism, which talks only about the way we look at it and the way we cognize it with our mental representations, where social actors, their representations and their meanings do not have any role to play. So learners and students, please learn to distinguish between the two perspectives. Concepts like anxiety, social mobility, any concept, you take social concept like suicide, if you take religion, so these are very much external to individual, and they are unchanging, and they are very much objective concepts, and which must be understood in its very own terms. And that concept, if you want to define it objectively, that is fine, but unless and until you understand the socio-cultural epoch of that individual or that society which is displaying such a kind of a behavior, you won't be able to understand. So the question we are asking is, the epistemological position that fits the ontological position of constructivism is definitely interactionism. So against positivism and realism, we learn to place our position of constructivism, and in order to learn constructivism, another perspective of interactionism becomes very important. Let me go a little bit into the historical and the physical background of this particular interactionism. Between 1880 and 1900, there had been a huge debate between the natural sciences and the social sciences. The natural sciences was trying to vie for itself a very glamorous position because it felt that it was the superior of all the sciences, because it was using the best of the positive methodologies, and therefore its prestige was increasing in the scholarly community. As a result, it felt that the natural sciences was very speculative in its nature and was absolutely unworthy of consideration. Now, as these advances kept on rising, social sciences and philosophy was losing its foothold because more and more importance was being given to science and the positive methods of objectivity, since that was used for a very long time in the natural science pedigree. Now, as a result, we find an open clash developed between the natural sciences and the social science, and people were trying to draw a distinction between the natural sciences and the social sciences. Many began to criticize this non-scientific nature of the social sciences, especially the methodology which is being used by economics, philosophy, history, and others. And by 1885, we find that the legitimacy of the noble social sciences like history and sociology was getting declined. And people were starting to re-examine the relationship between scientific methods and philosophy, because the non-natural social sciences, the softer sciences which we say, were talking about their legitimacy. A movement emerged 1890 that returned to the work of Immanuel Kant, a great philosopher, and the movement was known as Neo-Kantianism. And we were trying to re-examine the relationship between philosophy and science, and why exactly we cannot give them, the social sciences, the same status and the nobility that we give to the natural sciences. And therefore there was a diverse group of thinkers who merged and who emerged into this particular scenario, and there were kind of debates that were going on between the two sciences. And there were many, like Lange, Fisher and Helmholtz. Every one of them was trying to find out what can be the way of resolving this kind of a debate. The two thinkers who became very important in this context, one was Rickert and another was Windelband. And both of them say that we need to search for a theory of knowledge that would help in the history and society to subject itself to an investigation. And second, there was an urgent necessity to distinguish the subject matter of the two sciences, and also to say that you require two distinct methodologies to deal with two different sciences. Now, Wilhelm Windelband was a German philosopher, and he became associated with the Neo-Kantian movement, and he always focused on the relationships between philosophy and history. At one point of time, when people believed that historical investigation of society cannot happen and history will not be able to study society in a very scientific way, it was Windelband who said that no, this was not so. And we required a liberal concept of method from the natural sciences which will deal the social sciences in its own way. So let me tell you, social sciences must have a methodology of its own kind, and we cannot depend upon the natural sciences anymore, because history, philosophy, it will, devise its own ways and chalk out its own methodologies and strategies to study society. Society cannot just be left out in the hands of the natural scientists. And Windelband also turned to Kant's writings to establish a philosophical justification of the historical sciences. And in all these works, we were trying to find out what was the historical and ethical dimension of human conduct in society. And Windelband believed that the historical and the ethical dimensions of the human action must be made the subject matter of historical investigation, and human conduct must be brought into consideration, which was very cleverly spelled out. And Windelband argued that Kant had made a great mistake in excluding human action from the domain of factual knowledge. And he reasoned that if Kant's exclusion of human action was valid, only the natural sciences would become the legitimate bearers of fair knowledge, which was not to be. Because ethical dimensions in human conduct are important, and the roles they play as social actors become important here. And therefore, he was moving into a kind of a very heated debate. Therefore, it was very well said and done that the two sciences are different, they produce two different forms of knowledge, and therefore they talk about two different kinds of reality altogether. And therefore, there is a reality in the social platform which is not bound by the laws of the concrete reality, where laws cannot be like 2 plus 2 is equal to 4. It has to be more explanatory, more interpretive, and more flexible in nature, because that is how we can understand the human and the social conduct. And their judgments that they make in terms of the social world in which they live and act is more important, because one thing must be very understood very clearly. Science talks about a society where we do not live out, where we don't live and think, eat and sleep. But it happens in sociology, in other social sciences. We belong to that very world that we study. Therefore, the methodology has to be different, and the domains must be absolutely different. Therefore, Windelband wanted to say that we need to give more importance to values as well, because people attach values to their actions. People give subjective values to the actions. So therefore, mere facts will not do, because sciences can be hardly value-free sciences, because we always have our values and ideologies which we attach to our actions. And since social sciences deal with social actions, therefore these values and ideologies become more important. And since this is the domain of study, which is very different from the natural sciences, the methodology ought to be different. There are two different kinds of methodological approaches. And Windelband said that when natural sciences will deal with deductive laws. What are deductive laws? Where we have a theory, we kind of have a law, and then we go to the field and try to find out whether the findings actually befit our hypothesis. But social sciences, the interactionism that we are talking about, it deals with what? It deals with inductive sociology, inductive research, where you go to the field first. You will go to the field first, and then you will make your own findings, and then with that you will make your own theory or make your own dissertation or thesis. So, in case of interactionism, we move from particular to general, but whereas in case of positivism, we move from general to particular. That is the difference. This will bring us to the nomothetic or the ideographic sciences. What is nomothetic science? Every science which deals with interactionism, wherever we are talking about individual sciences, whenever we are talking about the particular, and then we are moving back to the general. So it is from general to the particular that we are talking about in the nomothetic sciences that we usually use or apply in the positive sciences. But whenever we go for any kind of interactionism or ideographic science, then we'll always start with the individual unique event, and then we will move back to the general. So that is what the difference is all about. What is the second premise? Symbolic interactionism views meanings as having a different source than those held by two dominant views just considered. It does not regard meaning as emanating from any intrinsic makeup of the thing that has meaning, nor does it see meaning as arising through a coalescence of psychological elements in the person. Instead, it sees meaning as arising in the process of interaction between two and more people. The meaning of a thing for a person grows out of the ways in which other persons act towards a person with regard to the thing. Their actions operate to define the thing for the person. That symbolic interactionism sees meanings as social products, as creations that are formed in and through the defining activities of people as they interact. This point of view gives symbolic interactionism a very distinctive position with profound implications. So, the meanings cannot just come out, but they are evolved, they are emerged, and they are produced by the interaction between the two individuals. Here we also talk about Zemail's association. We talk about different areas of interactionism and how individual gives meaning to his interactionism. How does the interaction take place? And it is here when we talk about imaginative rehearsal. We will learn more about it when we talk into when we go into the details of Herbert Blumer and obviously George Herbert Mead, the two of the founding fathers of symbolic interactionism, and how meanings come to be developed by the interaction between the two or more people, how triads are formed. So we'll come to the third premise, which says that the process of interpretation becomes of vital importance. And this process again has two steps which you must check out. The first, the actor indicates to himself the things towards which he is acting. And then he has to point out to himself the things that have meaning for them, because maybe all the things do not have meaning for them. So when he's interpreting the action and he's going through a process of interpretation, so he has to understand which are the things that has meaning for him. The making of such indications is an internalized social process in that the actor is acting with himself. And sometimes we call it the process of imaginative rehearsal, where the individual is talking to himself. The individual is, interacting with himself before going into or while undergoing the process of interaction. Sometimes if we go to a condolence ceremony and the person who's a bereaved mother or a bereaved father, he stands before us, we really don't know what to say. We really don't know how to start with it. So what do is we rehearse within ourselves the words, the sentences, the phrases that we might say. So that is a form of interaction and interpretation also, where the individual is trying to give a meaning to the people, to the objects that he's using or there in front of him, and trying to interpret it accordingly. The interaction with himself is something other than an interplay of psychological elements. It is an instance of the person engaging in the process of communication with himself. Second, by the virtue of this process of communicating with himself, the interpretation becomes a matter of handling meanings. The actor checks, rechecks, validates, and tries to find out what meaning finally evolves. So he is placed in the direction of his action. Accordingly, interpretation should not be regarded as a mere automatic application of established meanings, but as a formative process in which meanings are used and revised as instruments for the guidance and formation of action. So, interaction process is all about this, and more we move into the interaction process, we shall understand how individuals use, reuse their meanings. Maybe the meaning that he has attached already, he'll try to change the meaning and give a new meaning together. Today itself in the morning I've read about the 4th or the 5th dengue death that has happened in West Bengal. So maybe, a few days before rainy season or getting myself wet, going to the terrace, dancing in the rain was a huge experience for me, because that was a meaning of gay, of being very happy, of being very jubilant was attached to the rainy season. But maybe in my neighborhood, the 4th or the 5th dengue death has happened, so the meaning of rain has changed for me. Now when I go to the terrace, I look for the places where the water has logged, and I try to become more careful so that water logging doesn't happen, mosquitoes do not breed, and no longer such mishaps happen into my neighborhood. This is how you kind of play and imagine and reimagine the different uses and reuses of interpretations and things. So the meanings and their nature and their very prospects and their definitions will change for you, and this is how you will move into this jugglery of meanings and the interpretations. This is how our theory of interactionism was framed. Thank you.